The phone was connected. An employee holding the phone heard the voice coming from the other side. Winston. Everyone pay attention. Maintain a good level 1 combat readiness formation. Stay calm and don't panic. The eyes of the person holding the phone suddenly widened and filled with blood. He screamed loudly, "Ah!" followed by other people also holding their heads and screaming loudly. One after another they coughed. Bleeding. A person lying on the ground screaming in pain, "Ah!" On the phone came a voice saying, "Frontline workers, please maintain vigilance." Winston on this side shouted, "Execute orders from above." After speaking for a while, Winston was silent. He looked at the phone and sighed, thinking, forget it. In this situation, the possibility of being able to complete the order is not great. Even the person behind him can't stop it now. Cold sweat. It can be noticed that behind Winston's back in his thick armor sweating. Winston thought, that King Candela, he's like a god of war. Winston shouted and ordered the other person, "If you still move, get up quickly and go to the battlefield to clean up." The sun came out after many days of rain in Nuo-jin. Winston breathed a sigh of relief, it's finally done. Winston stood in the middle of the rubble. He sighed looking at the phone and said, "Boss Lin seems to have a temper not very good." Had just finished speaking. Then there was a voice behind him that made Winston startled, "That's normal. Old friend." Someone just came up behind Winston and said, "If a dog comes in and barks loudly, then makes a mess and tramples on the grass." Joseph just comes up with one hand on his hip and one hand waving hello. Winston said, "Trust me. Your temper will only get worse." Winston saw Joseph and breathed a sigh of relief, saying, "That old face also makes me angry." Winston crossed his arms and said to Joseph, "What you mean is that the god-level dream beast is a guard dog. And we are good dogs. Star." Joseph listened and remained silent, then walked closer and patted Winston's shoulder and said, "Hey buddy. You're thinking too much." Joseph smiled. His eyes narrowed and said to Winston, "You guys are nothing more than fleas." Winston listened and wanted to punch Joseph, thinking, "Fuck you, if it's not like I can't beat you. I can't bear this injustice. I'll punch that old face of yours so you know what a punching bag is." Winston really wanted to fight but tried to hold back and comfort himself. "Calm down, I'm the leader of the fighting team. I can't get angry." Winston tried to breathe in and out and raise his voice. Said, "No matter what, this matter is finally over." Joseph stood a distance away from Winston and said, "But everything is far from over." Joseph looked at the clear blue sky and said, "Our intelligence department has tracked down the origin of this magic mirror egg. But still no result." Joseph's eyes closed and added, "Some person or organization dropped these monsters on Nuo-jin. That is really the invisible enemy that is hard to see." The pouring rain. Somewhere on a high rock. A person wearing a red robe with yellow hair fluttering. He reached out to touch the jade piece on his side. It was a piece of jade pendant with some strange shape. He was sad, lowered his eyes and remained silent. After a while the other person smiled like a crazy person. And Winston and Joseph were on this side then looked at each other silently without saying anything. Joseph tilted his head back to look at the sky as if he was thinking about something. And Winston next to him saw Joseph like that and thought to himself, how many years have I not seen such a determined expression from Joseph? Since that day, 10 years ago in the secret tower, a person ran away, through the hallway to the desk. The other person called each word, Joseph. Joseph at that time was still young standing behind the desk and turned his head to look at Winston with a bright smile. "Oh my God. Here isn't it my old friend Winston? Why is he free today to come to my workplace to ask?" At that time, Winston was extremely angry and scolded. "Don't use this trick anymore. Damn, you arbitrarily mobilized my people to carry out a mission. Right?" Winston said at that time. This guy was still blind in one eye. Extremely angry, pointing his finger at Joseph and scolding. "How can you use it so conveniently? Why do you always bring disaster to me? Today, you must give me an explanation. Even if an elder is sitting here, he cannot help you. This person is Gresham Winston when he was young, one of the great knights of the secret tower. And Joseph, Dalia were knights at the same time." Joseph came closer and raised his hands to quickly comfort Winston, who was furious, and said, "Calm down, Winston. Your blood pressure is rising again now." Winston came in both angry and red-faced, shouted, "Don't talk nonsense. Tell me what you did." Joseph blinked one eye and smiled brightly and said, "If you want me to say it. They use it very well. You really know how to train people. Joseph also gave Winston a like. More work following me on a mission will also become training for them. Winston, you don't want the people under you to encounter any mishaps when acting alone. Right? Winston was angry but couldn't argue. Looked at the file on the table and said, I didn't ask how you felt about using them. Joseph quickly picked up the file and said, don't say too much. You quickly solve these tasks first. Winston crossed his arms and leaned against the board and said, that's the original job of the people you sent out there. You just have to shut up and do it. At this moment Winston was silent in his heart, then glanced over. Joseph said, that reminds me. It's rare that Dalia isn't by your side. What happened between you two? Joseph held the file and said, nothing special. Yesterday she was told by Tari to go on a mission. There was no arrangement for us to act together. It probably wasn't any important mission. Joseph's mouth opened in an expectant smile and said, calculating the time. She'll probably be back soon. Joseph held the file with a smile that couldn't be seen and boasted and said, I can't see you for a while now. I really miss her. Our wedding anniversary is coming up soon after she returns. Why don't we go on a long vacation to relax? Joseph's words made me let Winston behind turn into a sour lemon. At this moment, a hand pushed the door open. An employee holding a file in his hand pushed the door, letting light flood into the room. Staff. The employee was breathing heavily. Joseph and Winston turned their eyes to look at the employee. Before Joseph could smile, he heard the employee breathing heavily. He opened his mouth to say something. The file fell hard, down on the ground. Winston was bewildered after hearing this. And Joseph's face immediately faded away. His eyes widened. Winston looked at Joseph bewilderedly. An explosion rang out. Winston quickly covered his face to save himself. He wasn't hit, but blood was still flowing from Winston's forehead. Winston opened his eyes and saw only a pile of rubble in front of him. The room that was intact before now had a huge hole. The staff all looked bewildered. Outside, it was snowing. The snow was completely white. A quick step ran across the snow. When Winston ran out, he saw something happening. Winston's pupils were dilated. Again, I only saw Joseph's head in the snow covered with snow and Joseph's face was dark. Looking more clearly, I only saw that in Joseph's arms holding Dalia there were no signs of life anymore. She was lying on her back with her head in Joseph's arms and legs hanging down. Joseph hugged Dalia's body and glanced at Winston's body. He said, Winston, please give me a long vacation from the tower. Joseph's eyes narrowed deeply. Looking at the injured face on his face, Dalia still covered in snow, said, I want to bury my wife. Winston remained silent and did not speak. The staff also had to cover their mouths to keep from making a sound. The back of Joseph was lonely. He took his dead wife's body out in the snow. A month later, in the war room, someone said, this is today's mission report. Winston was sitting at work, holding a file and said, oh, I see. Please pay more attention to Joseph's situation in the near future, and if necessary send more people to help him carry out his tasks. Case. The subordinate replied, yes. Winston's sweat dropped looking at the file and thought to himself, after Dalia passed away. Joseph's situation became extremely bad. Winston thought of his friend who was always so happy was now locked in his room alone. Winston thought, for almost the entire long vacation Joseph never left the house and most of the time he locked himself in his room and didn't say a word. Come on. He tortured himself physically and mentally like a prisoner. Winston thought again of his friend going out in the rain to carry out his mission, after returning to the secret tower. He began to train harder before, at the same time performing the task non-stop like a machine. Joseph punched the wall with his fist. Walking proudly, Joseph was now like a madman, standing in the rain screaming loudly. Winston thought, in the eyes of outsiders, he is an invincible holy fire and as bright as the sun. Fighting bravely and not afraid of death. But I understand that he is wandering between life and death to forget the pain in my heart. His time has stood still since that day. The words of the staff in front of him pulled Winston's thoughts back. Winston's face was in shadow, dark eyes were a bit serious. Can't continue like this. We have to find a way. At this time there was an echo. Winston raised his eyes to look at the employee who had just opened the door. Breathing heavily and quickly saying, report. Footsteps rang out quickly. Winston scolded, what a funny story. Winston gritted his teeth and walked quickly down the hallway saying, that bastard didn't even say a word. Ran alone to kill Wild. Wild's a heartless black wizard who can't be dealt with easily. Winston walked and gritted his teeth thinking of Joseph's eyes. Praying in his heart, "Oh divine light. Please don't let anything happen." Walked quickly up the long stairs. Winston quickly pushed the door open and shouted loudly, "Joseph! You!" Only seeing Joseph in the room covered in bandages. He glanced at Winston and asked, Winston, why are you here?" Joseph's hand clutched the bleeding Candela sword. Joseph said, "I was just about to go out on a mission." Winston gritted his teeth, sweating. Winston walked into the room watching Joseph scream said, "What's your mission? Look at the state of your body now. You should be counting your lucky stars. You didn't lose any limbs from fighting. Wild. Not long after Dalia left. You transformed yourself. I've become like this. If you keep being like that, how can she feel secure up there?" Joseph's unbandaged eyes glanced around, wondering if those words could shake him. Managed to move Joseph, but Joseph turned away and said, "Then there's no other way but to apologize to her." Winston's eyes shrunk and he stared at Joseph. Then Winston waved his hand with extreme force, punched Joseph in the face and shouted, "Please wake up." Joseph was beaten but did not resist. Light and darkness crept into the room. The curtains fluttered. Winston pushed Joseph hard, shouted at the window, "Dalia's death was unexpected. Tragic, but not your fault. You don't have to blame yourself to the point of wanting yourself to die on a mission. Don't think that you are enough. Strong enough to protect everyone. You will only increase the pain of the survivors around you." Winston looked straight into Joseph's face and shouted, "Listen here, Joseph. Old friend, I know you are very hurt. Very hurt. Even want to die." Winston shouted words that seemed to warn Joseph, "But you must know how to overcome it. Try to endure no matter how painful it is and don't give up. What has been lost, no matter how precious it is, there will be no more. Don't think about the good things that have been lost. Calm down and think about what you still have now." The clock ticked to the hour. Joseph's eyes widened. In his eyes he seemed to have a strand of red hair fluttering. He remembered, at that time on the white snow. Blood was flowing red all over the snow. Someone called, "Joseph." Joseph cried, tears flowing down. Dalia was all over injured and covered in blood. She put her hand on Joseph's face and said, "Don't blame yourself." Dalia tried to open her eyes and breathed heavily. Looking at Joseph, she raised her hands with her weak strength. Said to Joseph, "I'm about to die. Forgive me, I can only leave you alone to take care of our child." Joseph touched Dalia's arm and said with a trembling voice, Don't die, Dalia. I will find a way to save you. I will definitely. Please, wait for me a little longer." Joseph's tears filled his eyes. Falling to the snow, Dalia tried to force herself to say, "No, there's no need to waste my time. I already." Tears also appeared in Dalia's eyes. She weakly said, "I'm sorry. I can't go to the end with you. I really hope I can be with you." Each other. Their hands clasped tightly, thinking of their too young daughter Melissa, together watching the children become a real night. Joseph shouted in disbelief, "No. Dalia, you can't die. But before he finished speaking, Dalia's weak, powerless hand fell to the white snow. Joseph's face was in darkness. His pupils shrank and trembled as he said, "Love you." But Dalia was already within the circle. Joseph's hand left this world. Joseph watched Dalia die in his arms. His hand holding her trembled non-stop. He hugged Dalia tightly in his arms, looked up to the sky and let out a long scream. The knight's eyes never fell, but now he cries like a child. The image of the girl throwing away her beloved teddy bear, standing there crying, the image of her loving wife gradually cracking. The clock struck 12 o'clock. Joseph's voice trembled, "I'm still there." Winston pulled his hand away from Joseph. Joseph stood there shaking all over saying, "Melissa." Joseph remembered his daughter small, holding his thumb, holding the sword in one hand and smiling, "I still have Melissa." Winston heard that and let out a breath and said, "You just take care of yourself first. You won't have to do any duty in the near future. What's the new deal?" Winston left the fruit on the table and said, "I brought a few things to comfort you. Please recover quickly." Joseph covered his face with his hands, blood trickling down. Before when Winston left said, "There is still someone waiting for that person." Winston walked out of the room, closed the door and breathed loudly and said, "I hope to see you back soon with a great power. My friend old man, I will wait for that day." Winston turned and left, returned to the present. Since then 10 years have passed. Winston looked at the back of his old friend, looking at Joseph's face, now marked with signs of age, looking up to the sky in contemplation. I seem to have finally seen that invincibility again. And over here the chandelier on the ceiling in the morning. An angry person threw the papers and teacup down on the table with an angry scream. Andrew slammed his hands on the table and gritted his teeth, scolding, "Damn, damn." Andrew's face was filled with anger. He clenched his teeth and said in great anger, "That's a dream beast." "It's nothing." Andrew consoled himself, then stood straight and thought to himself, how dare he say such things to the order of truth that he just demolished. He's mocking the order of truth. There's no other meaning baying it. He was clear saying, "No need to thank me for beating you up like this. I'm just doing what was expected of me." Andrew thought of Candela's face emitting light, then angrily thought, according to the records, the legendary King Candela wasn't such a frivolous character. This must be the intention of the person who summoned him. The heroic spirit single-handedly destroyed us after he was summoned. Andrew's hand on the table clenched angrily, thinking, this means that to the person behind it. It means nothing. How much of a terrorist existence have I teased? Quote. Andrew stood still in the room without speaking anymore. At this moment Andrew heard a knock on the door. He was startled and asked, "Who is that?" A person with blue hair with one strand of hair standing up. Wearing round glasses on his nose. Leading a powerful army into the room. The other person raised his voice and said to Andrew, "For violating the relevant regulations, officer. All your powers have been forced to stop and go into a pending review state. Please don't act rashly, Vice President Andrew." It turns out that the blue-haired person is Diamond Einspern, other Vice President of the Order of Truth. Diamond pushed his glasses. He clasped one hand behind the other and raised his hand to say to Andrew, "I guess you must know how big a mistake you made. How many great losses will the Truth Society suffer?" Andrew gritted his teeth and narrowed his eyes as he looked at Diamond thinking, does the young man who has just been promoted want to take this opportunity to pull me off my horse? Do he want to blame me? There is no such chance. Calm down. Everything can still change direction without losing my nobility. Andrew held out his hand to explain to Diamond, "I made a wrong decision. But my entire argument and basis of judgment are not wrong. The only mistake I admit is only the mistake I misjudged the enemy's strength, and this must be exchanged for." Diamond now smiled, showing all his teeth, and said, "You don't need to must tell me these words." Diamond clasped his hands behind his butt and said, "As far as I know, you were investigating the owner of that level 1 bookstore, and feel hostile towards it." Andrew quite leisurely asked again, "So what? The person who summoned the dream beast this time is the remnant of the white wolf. So what does it have to do with the bookstore owner?" Diamond smiled and looked at Andrew and said, "It seems like you don't know something. The secret tower just contacted us. The person who summoned Candela has been confirmed to be the owner of the bookstore." Diamond pushed his glasses and smiled. Andrew smiled contemptuously and said, "Therefore, we have reason to suspect that you did that action solely out of your own selfishness. It was because of you that the bookstore owner took the initiative to attack. Has led to heavy losses for the Truth Association." Andrew placed his hand on his chest and shouted, "That's nonsense. Me." But before he could argue, Diamond came closer to Andrew and smiled and said, "I did. Having said that, it's useless for you to say anything to me. Now you should consider what to do next to solve the problem." The silhouettes of two people fell on the wall. Diamond-like, a smiling monster looked at Andrew. Andrew pursed his lips. His eyes closed, thinking, is it over yet? While the two of them were in hot water, there was an announcement, "Attention all scholars of the Truth Association. The reincarnation machine has been attacked." The two people who were arguing must have stop. Andrew seemed to regain his confidence and said to Diamond, "I remember that when alert level 1 is raised, number A will remain in its original position and continue to work under supervision to ensure that all organizations can operate normally." Andrew reached out to Diamond, "Am I right, President Diamond?" Drops of water fell to the floor. "Where is the light?" That light shines straight down, illuminating an area of sky. A group of people are standing. A pair of feet with black boots steps forward. A blurry silhouette of someone appears in the darkness. Ji Jixu wears a short dress, walking very bravely here. Ji Jixu smiled and said, "The white wolf is dead. My revenge is over. The most important thing now is to accept everything the white wolf has left behind." Ji Jixu walked to a door. She raised her hand to push open the secret room door. This place had a long staircase leading down a dark passage. Ji Jixu raised her voice and said, "This is the place." Only saw blood flowing down below. Bodies lying all over. Blood covered the ground. Jixu stepped down with her feet. Wherever she went there was blood all over her shoes. Other hunters were also gathering to clean up. Jixu walked down. She checked the surroundings. At this moment, a scent entered her nose. Jixu snorted loudly, and quickly used a handkerchief to wipe her nose. Thinking, if you can live here for so long, these white wolf hunters have already gone crazy. Jixu walked past the bloody place. Then went to another bloody place, where there were broken blue test tubes. Blood all over them. Jixu stood looking at a giant test jar was broken. She said, "That's the egg incubation warehouse of the magic mirror." Jixu looked at the remaining liquid in the jar. She raised her eyes and looked silently without speaking. At this moment Max appeared. Both his body was covered in blood. One arm was gone, being bandaged. Max looked at Jixu and said, "This subordinate has completed the task you assigned." Jixu was startled looking at his missing arm. Max asked, "Max, your hand?" Max did not feel any pain because of his lost arm, but his eyes were extremely serious and said, "It's okay. The master has ordered me to try my best to help the young lady. Now my subordinates have complete all tasks." Max gave a box to Jixu said, "This is what the white wolves mastered. The original formula for the tainted blood of the wolves of the Hollow Court." Jixu's eyes opened loudly. After a while she closed her eyes and said, "You did very well, Max." Jixu raised her hand to take the other box and said, "Don't worry. I will do the rest." But before Jixu's finger placed it on the box emitted a purple light that prevented her from holding it. A purple thunderbolt from nowhere hit the box hard. Jixu quickly snatched her hand back. Jixu touched his hand and said, "This is the runic secret art of the White Wizards." Max held the other box and said, "Lady, you can ask Mr. Hayward to take a look at it. Maybe there will be a way." Jixu repeated the name, Hayward. Jixu thought of a certain man. "That was my father's guest. I should have thought of him first." However, that incident of Ryan shows the brand of loyalty of the White Wizards does not mean it is absolutely safe. If the secret of the impure blood formula is revealed right now, the consequences will be very unpredictable. Jixu thought so and said, "First go home and consider that later. It's too dangerous to stay here now." Max nodded and replied, "Yes, ma'am." Max turned away. At this moment a shadow fell on the wall. Jixu was startled and thought, "A bit, who is that level of destruction breath?" At this moment a smile with white teeth. A voice came out in the darkness, "You're impressive to be able to detect my presence even when I've completely concealed my killing intent." A pair of gloved hands appeared, along with a muscular arm. Burton sat on a wall looking down at Jixu smiling and saying, "I'm not a guy your enemy." Burton's eyes stared at Jixu. "I just want to see what kind of character the new hunter who wiped out the white wolf is." Jixu was sweating a little and also stared at Burton. The two remained silent, not saying anything, but they seemed to be fighting in silence. Burton sat on the wall behind him. A fierce black monster appeared. As for Jixu, it didn't fit. Behind her, the shadow of a wolf appeared. Two monsters seemed to be under the bed, confronting each other in silence. Burton's eyes widened slightly, silently thinking, "That's amazing. This lady looks young but her eyes are sharp. Her breathing is steady. It's like a lone wolf patiently observing its prey." Jixu can be seen standing but behind her there was a pair of wolf eyes watching. Burton commented, "There is no doubt she is an excellent hunter and has been through many battles. It seems she is about to reach the threshold of destruction, and she's just one step away from her goal." Burton jumped down the wall, holding his coat in one hand and his pocket in the other, saying, "That Helix just wants to join into plots and tricks. Lost unfairly." Burton looked at Jixu and said, "No wonder." When the bookstore owner was willing to help, Jixu listened when she got to the bookstore owner. Her eyes opened and she looked at Burton and asked again, "Did you just say bookstore owner?" Before Burton could answer, someone shouted from behind, "Found it! Is the leader." In the distance two dark silhouettes appeared. They quickly shouted, "Report, leader. I am Parva Rostilo of Squad 1. In front of me and the captain have gathered everyone. The remaining members of Spider were lucky enough to survive." The shadow said, "Because a senior helped. The total loss of human casualties was much lower than expected." Burton stood still without speaking. Burton waved to the person who had just arrived, "Sup. Looks like you're still alive, little spider. Parvarostilo heard that and pointed at Burton and said, "Oh, senior. How are you in that place?" "Is that so?" Parvarostilo and the captain looked at Burton. Parvarostilo shouted and said, "Leader. The person who saved me and the captain is this person. The Pale Night Riser, Mr. Oman." Burton heard the nickname. It was as if he was hit in the head by an arrow. Jijitsu heard that and remained silent. And Parvarostilo was punched in the head by the captain. Jijitsu heard that and looked at Burton and said, "So it's you. Thank you for protecting my subordinates." Jijitsu looked at Burton and called out, "Burton Ackerman, the Pale Watchman." Burton also happily accepted the new nickname. He said, "It's me. No need to thank me. I'm just doing my duty." Burton raised his voice and said, "I'm really curious what kind of power boss Lin gives you." Jijitsu's figure fell to the floor. She said, "He gave me the power that can control the power of impure blood." Jijitsu clenched his fist, smiling at Burton proudly, saying, "With this power, my fate, the future hunters, will be in their own hands." Hearing that, Burton said, "So that's it." He thought to himself, "Is this the new path the bookstore owner said?" Burton thought of Lin Ji's face, "Not just my own new path but the hunter's new path. No need to suffer from unclean blood nor suffer from a fate of madness." Burton's arms trembled a bit. He said, "The bookstore owner should be praised. This will be the way to save all the hunters." Burton shouted loudly, "My parents, teacher and friends are all killed by unclean blood. I witnessed with my own eyes that their entire bodies were twisted. Hair and fur grew all over their bodies. But they could not do anything. And now the new hunters will no longer have to go through that pain. It hurts like that again." Burton had to tilt his head up to stop the tears from falling. He said, "If it weren't for the bookstore owner's gift, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to control my excitement right now." Quote. Jijitsu also said, "Now we will all rise together. The bookstore owner will give new blessings to the hunters." Burton clenched his hands. He raised his voice and shouted, "Under his protection we will be reborn." The two reached out to shake each other's hands as if they had reached a new agreement. They said together, "That's right. What the bookstore owner said is definitely correct." In his words praising the bookstore owner's friendly actions, the two of them for the first time met each other and created a deep consensus, officially becoming soulmates. At this time the captain held the piece of paper next to him and said, "Leader, I saw a map over there." He gave the map to Jijitsu. Jijitsu happily took it and said, "This is the map of Nuojin's underground passage. The hunters' white wolves can come and go freely in the dense network of underground corridors because of this." Jijitsu happily said, "Very good. With this new spider hunters will have more advantages." Quote. Jijitsu ordered, "Take away all usable things. Then start arranging to make Dream Beast explosives. This time we must completely make the magic mirror eggs disappear on the land." Nuojin, the subordinate, replied, "Yes." Burton silently looked at Jijitsu. Burton's cloak fluttered. He turned away and said, "After that I did everything the bookstore owner wanted me to do. I leave the next thing to you to solve." Decided. "I will leave first." Burton turned and left coolly and said, "At some appropriate time I will become your strength. I look forward to our future cooperation. That's us. Young leader, I hope that day is not far away." Jijitsu blinked an eye and said, "Maybe it will be as you said. Mr. Ackerman, maybe there will be something it's important to ask for your help." Burton waved his hand and said, "No problem, because it's the bookstore owner's wish. I won't refuse." His lips moved and said, "You have to act quickly. A little." Burton's eyes were immersed in the darkness. He turned his head slightly. His red pupils flashed in the darkness. His voice was low and he said, "If you are a bookstore customer, you must always remember your position clearly. Don't forget to fulfill your duties as a bookstore owner." Where Burton stood as if there was a giant monster casting a long shadow on the ground. Burton said, "1,000 times. Don't disappoint your expectations." His finished speaking before the eyes of Jijitsu's people. Burton shrugged and jumped away. Jijitsu stood silently without saying anything. After a while Jijitsu seemed to wake up and said, "So that's it." After a while Jijitsu ordered the hunters to give up packing up the remaining belongings. Again, "Let's set up explosives. Then all members must retreat immediately, making sure to clean up the remnants of the magic mirror egg." A subordinate replied, "Don't worry, leader. We are experts in this." The whole group of hunters began to clean up and place explosives under the leadership of Jiku. Some of them quickly ran away. Bomb has been activated. Max ran and asked Jiku, "Miss, there's something I'm not clear about." Mr. Ackerman's last words just now were clearly a warning, but I don't feel any murderous intent. Neither did he mean it. What is that? Jiku replied while running. Through the previous conversation, Mr. Ackerman and I have established a cooperative relationship in the future. According to what he said, we are both customers of the store. Books. So of course the positions will be equal. His emphasizing this point seems to want to convey a certain message to me. And just now the Iron Will has received a new response. The breath of destruction level, the destruction here is not 1 but 2. Max's pupils shrank. Jiku also narrowed his eyes and said, "In other words, Mr. Ackerman has felt the breath of that destruction level powerhouse. Because unable to determine the enemy's location, he appeared here to protect us." The explosion echoed. The fire burned brightly behind the two of them. Jiku continued to explain, the tone in what he said just now was his own attitude. This time we owe him those 2 favors. A fire exploded. Somewhere, a stream of water was flowing. Jiku's voice still echoed, "The urgent task now is to leave this place of trouble as soon as possible." About this original method, it seems that you can only go to the bookstore owner to ask later. The fire roared. Somewhere there was a stream of water flowing. A pair of hands appeared and a pair of legs appeared. Stepping on the ground, a figure wearing a cloak and a hat with silver hair in the dark looking at the flowing water. The other person pushed the hat and said, "Pretty good. Even though I tried to completely cover up the supernatural aura my own mortal. Yet there are still 2 people who can detect me." Wild leaned on an umbrella and stood in the darkness and said, "It seems the world has really changed. Elite talents like this will no longer appear in groups of well-trained hunters. However, that may be what Boss Lin wants to see." Wild thought of Burton's face. That hunter of destruction was called Ackerman during the continued with that young girl. He did not neglect to follow me. Before leaving he was able to precisely target me and release a murderous aura. At the same time implying that my companions his group leave as soon as possible. The snake eyes behind Wild's mask flashed. He's as decent and elegant as the best black wizards. Wild's figure fell to the ground. His hand I trembled a bit as I thought. Even I can't help but be affected by that murderous aura. I heard that he was commissioned to hunt and kill me. If he hadn't given up, it would have been really difficult to deal with. Wild gritted his teeth and said, "No matter what. It's exactly as expected of Boss Lin." Wild stood under the waterfall looking at the sky. Can use an elite talent like this as a pawn to save everything in the situation. It seems that Boss Lin's intentions are not small at all. I am truly lucky to be respected by Boss Lin, even giving such a gift. Wild's hand raised a blast of black air. He said, "It's time for me to return the favor." The water below the calm lake surface suddenly felt like something had hit it hard and it flew up higher than Wild's body. Water fell all over Wild's mask. Before waiting for the water to run out, in Wild's hand there was a familiar figure. Eyes growing all over, a familiar head drooping. Wild said, "We have to finish his mission as soon as possible." Helix's whole body is now like a monster, with tentacles sprouting from his mouth and his eyes are also. Wild smiled and said, "Otherwise, it would be a waste of his effort to guide him. For so long, what a perfect living material." Wild stood on the water, holding the upper half of Helix's body and said, "Boss Lin is right. A person should know how to be decisive and kill in every way. Work, and don't let them have any chance to rise again. This time we won't repeat the same mistakes again." Wild's eyes glanced down and said, "Absolutely not." The sun in the distance shined orange light on the city. This place was Nuo Jin 10 years ago. A young girl was humming sang and smiled brightly saying, "Magic potion ingredients. Magic potion ingredients. I will go out to buy magic potion ingredients for the teacher." The girl's face was smiling with eyes invisible, clenching her fists, and smiled and said, "I went out to buy all the ingredients for the teacher. While he was sleeping I was really a good disciple. I'll go home tonight and ask the teacher to cook something delicious for me as a reward." This young man is Wild's chief disciple, Charles. Charles held the shopping paper in his hand and said, "The missing ingredients are crowns of the red sulfur pterodactyl, claws of the amethyst mouse, and spores of the moonbeard mushroom. Let me see, what is the address of the magic medicine shop that the teacher often goes to?" At this time, Someone standing behind called out, "Isn't this Brother Charles?" Young Charles heard that. His eyes lit up. He turned his head and smiled and said, "This voice is." The other young man had a youthful face, a tall figure with purple hair, and an earring on his mouth. Charles looked at the other person and happily greeted him, saying, "It's indeed you, junior brother Yuan. It's been a long time. No see, have you completed the task the teacher assigned? This is Wild's second disciple, Yuan." Yuan looked at Charles and replied, "I'm doing it. Why are you out alone today? Teacher, is he busy with something?" Charles raised his hand to explain, "No. I'll tell you quietly. Actually, I hid the teacher outside to help him do it. If you caught me like this, I had no other choice. After you finish the task, don't talk about this with the teacher. The teacher just researched a new spell a few days ago. Originally he planned to conduct the experiment immediately." Charles recounted. At that time he saw Wild sleeping on the table, but because he had been reading documents for the past few days, he was tired. When I found out, he was already sleeping. Charles immediately took the cloak to cover Wild, then closed the door and left. It's not because I'm lazy or anything, but as the teacher's disciple, I naturally have to shoulder this responsibility. For the teacher, I'm sorry. Charles raised 2 fingers and closed his eyes proudly as he recounted. That's why I skipped the task of cleaning the workplace and went out to help the teacher buy the ingredients to cast the spell. Don't look at me like that. I also have to ignore the danger when doing this. Yuan over there heard the story and was speechless. Silent. Charles was still saying to himself, teacher hates his workplace the most when it's messy. If you don't clean up your office, you'll definitely be scolded. Yuan smiled, showing all his teeth and said, I know, I absolutely won't tell the teacher. Yuan raised his hand and said, what a coincidence. I know where the magic medicine store that teacher often goes to is. If you can't find it, how about we go together? Charles was happy to hear that. He clenched his fists and said, really, so thank you. The silhouettes of 2 brothers walking on the main road. The sun shined on the silhouettes of the 2 of them, casting 2 long shadows. As they walked, Charles said, you really did me a great favor. If it weren't for I really don't know how much longer I have to search. After all these years of experience outside, your junior brother is really becoming more and more trustworthy. Yuan said, too much praise. Too much praise. I really want to practice on my own as soon as possible. I don't know when the teacher will allow me. I hope it will be soon. Charles's shadow was smiling happily, while Yuan's shadow was just I saw a slightly curled mouth smiling as if completing some calculation. They passed an alley. There was a black crow perched. Charles said, hey, I'm telling you. Charles looked at the small alley in front of him and said, the address of that magic medicine shop is really located in a small alley like this? Yuan replied, yes. It's possible that these drug dealers have something a bit strange. Charles said without any doubt, well, since it's a place where the teacher often comes, there shouldn't be any danger here. In case something happens, junior brother, you must stay close to me. My hand contains the teacher's destiny. Can make me teleport immediately to the office when in danger. Yuan heard that and looked at the blue ring on Charles's hand. Charles did not realize the danger but was still talking, it's necessary to use it when you encounter it. So please don't be too far away from me. Yuan's face behind him smiled mysteriously and said, you don't need to worry brother. Yuan even emphasized the 2 words brother. Yuan said, and most of all if you encounter any danger I will hug you tightly. Charles cheerfully replied, okay. In the landfill behind them, the crow was knocking over piles of trash looking for food. Charles and Yuan walked to a dirty, dilapidated place, dirty and smelly. Charles said a little suspiciously, how long do we have to go? Brother, it's so dirty and smelly here. I don't think I'll ever come back here again. While Charles was walking, I suddenly realized something. Someone raised a dangerous voice and said, oh, what's with that terrible smell? A feather fell. They entered a house and saw that the place was dilapidated like an abandoned house. Someone's black hair was flying. A red cloak was also flying, sitting on the pillar and talking. As far as I can see, there is no smell more disgusting than the smell of that Wild. He continued, you brat has smooth skin. The stench on Wild guys like you even goes straight into your nose, making people nauseous. Charles was startled and quickly stepped back and shouted, what did you say? In Charles's pupils was reflected the image of the other person. That person was like an Egyptian mummy. the whole body wrapped in white cloth. His mouth was sewn shut with a needle, moving his lips as he watched Charles introduce himself and say, "Destructive rank dark wizard and hunter. Harper Fred." Fred sat on the pillar of the house holding a large axe blade in his hand and said, "How? Old man, didn't that wild mention my name to you? That mummy's nails were long." He spoke in a low voice. No wonder. He has to maintain his noble, elegant image in front of his disciples. Like, how can you mention the enemy who ruined his face and humiliated him? Fred's eyes were wide open, full of red blood. His mouth was sewn shut, trying to say disgusting words. However, it's possible that he didn't think about the disciple he loved the most. For this reason, Charles instinctively stepped back to protect Yuan behind him and said, "This person is very dangerous. Junior brother, I'm afraid he's going to kill us and cause disadvantage to the teacher. We have to quickly go back and tell him." "Teacher." Charles protected Yuan behind like that but did not know that Yuan's face behind him was showing a dangerous smile. The figure sitting on the pillar looked down and observed the two of them. Charles turned around and shouted at Yuan, "Quickly take my hand." But when Charles turned his head to look, Yuan behind him flashed a victorious smile. He used the knife to slash Charles's arm with the blue ring on it. In Charles's extremely bewildered eyes, Charles was bewildered, not understanding what had happened. Blood splattered, accompanied by a loud scream of pain. "Ah!" Charles fell to the ground with blood flowing out. Charles trembled non-stop. Yuan seemed quite satisfied. He smiled, "You can't escape like this, Charles." Yuan standing there in shock, holding Charles's arm and saying, "Be obedient and die here for me. Then Senior Harper Fred will turn you into a corpse puppet. Add the will we need into it and then approach Wild. Wait for me to drain his magic and knowledge. Then use the hands of the disciple he loves the most to kill him." Yuan smiled with satisfaction. Everything sounds so good. What ears? Charles vomited blood and lay on the ground, gritting his teeth and saying, "Did you all collude? Why did you want to betray the teacher?" Yuan touched the ring on Charles's severed hands and said, "For what? Are you asking me for something? Aren't you ashamed of yourself for saying that?" "Charles." Yuan took the ring in his hand and said, "This item looks really delicate. Looking at it, it seems like Wild really cares about you a lot." Yuan shouted loudly, extremely jealously saying, "But all of this should belong to me alone. Obviously my talent is superior to yours. But he likes trash. More like you." Yuan raised his foot and kicked Charles's shoulder hard and shouted, "The one who caused me this humiliation is you. With that quality of yours, what qualifications do you think you have to be Wild's close disciple?" Quote. Yuan continuously stomped on Charles as if venting his resentment and said, "Why are you always above me? That guy, and I can only learn lower magic than you. Never mind, whether it's love or teaching. You always get the best resources first. Without them, you can definitely achieve more than now." Charles was in pain, spitting blood from his mouth. Charles lay on the ground and coughed. "Maybe I'm lucky to be favored by the teacher." Charles raised his eyes to look at Yuan. "But in terms of teaching and his personality, the teacher will never show any favoritism. I have never learned any spell that is more advanced than what you have learned. The teacher always treats everyone equally in this regard. It is you who doubt this that are not qualified to be the teacher's disciples." Charles's blue pupils clearly saw Yuan's face. A complex formation was drawn where Charles lay. Yuan was still scolding, "This trash." At this time, when Yuan saw the formation, he was a little startled and shouted, "What?" Yuan's leg moved back a little bit. Yuan was hit hard on the leg. It turned out that Charles was not human, truly disabled. Charles used the spell, Seal Spell Stone Spear. Charles lay down and crawled right under Yuan's feet. Yuan's eye was hit and blood flowed. He was in pain and screamed, "Ah!" Because of the pain he discussed it. Yuan's hand holding the ring released the blue ring and fell. The ring fell. A shadow covered it. Charles trembled and tried to reach out to the ring and said in a slightly trembling voice, "It's safe for now. Go back to the teacher quickly. He's in danger." But right now Fred's voice was behind him. Then rang in Charles's ear, "Unfortunately, you will never see him again." Something black and long like a tentacle was wrapped in bandages and pierced Charles's chest. It turned out that thing is Fred's hand and he even said, "Damn it. If your opponent is another destruction level person, maybe you still have a chance to escape." Charles's eyes widened, unable to believe what was in front of him. Fred continued. But unfortunately my unclean blood comes from the invisible child and my body needs to rely on this piece of cloth to maintain its human form. Even though Fred had his mouth sewn shut, he still smiled brightly. What a great show. Fred stood up, glanced at Yuan and said, it was a win-win situation for both sides. But the result was that the other side used words to buy time, while being immersed in emotions and completely ignoring the other side, silently preparing the spell. If I hadn't acted in time, I would have dropped the piece of meat offered to my mouth. Are you sure that the qualifications you talk about are really above him? Quote. Yuan held his hands in pain and winced, while Charles fell down in a pool of blood, coughing loudly as he listened to the other two talking. Fred said, back to business. When I acted it must have been my breath. Has been noticed by Wild. So the original plan will have to be cancelled. He will quickly come here. If you don't want to meet him, you can bring the body to Helix of the White Wolves. Yuan heard that and asked, Senior, what about you? A voice whispered, with that vague consciousness of mine. Do you want me to die? Fred said to Yuan, save this hand. Besides, my men and I will set up a trap right here and kill Wild. Now that I think about it, it's too dangerous for him to live. So you should give up learning more spells. In Charles's eyes before closing his eyes, he whispered, I'm sorry, Master, I've disappointed you. You don't need to care about my disciples dying. They will take advantage of me. Master. Charles's eyes gradually closed and he still clearly heard Yuan's voice saying, damn. It's all because of this bastard who ruined my good deeds. What a hateful thing. Before Charles closed his eyes and left his thoughts. Still, if possible I really want to see you again. I really don't want to die. Charles closed his eyes. Tears falling, Sensei help. Over here. Wild's eyes opened. Wild stood up from the chair and called, Charles. Wild clutched the piece of cloth under the table and shouted, don't. His mouth shouted, don't. With a bang, the door wall of the room exploded. The photo of the three teachers and students fell to the ground and cracked. On this side Charles's arm was lying alone. Fred sat cross-legged holding two swords and waiting for Wild. Fred's eyes flashed. He said, here. The moon was high above. A blue light appeared. Wild appeared in front of Fred. When Wild appeared the first thing that caught his eye was Charles's arm. Fred looked at Wild and smiled provocatively. Isn't this Wild? Why are you looking so gloomy? You and I are considered to have known each other for a long time. We should say hello to each other. Good or bad? Wild remained silent and did not speak. Fred continued. Or should I say, you are not interested in anything else but only interested in the owner of this arm. Wild looked at the bloody arm on the ground and remained silent. Fred hatched big smile. That's right. This is the arm of the disciple you love the most. It's ironic. Your heavy and proud disciple was destroyed by the same person. And you can't do anything about it. The black scale. I mean, faceless man of the black scales. Wild's lips pursed tightly. Fred asked, how do you feel right now? Fred sat far away. In the middle was a purple magic formation waiting to be activated. Fred thought to himself, a little more stimulation. If he can't hold back his anger and takes one more step, he will be hit by the magic formation. This binding controls him, and when the time comes, my subordinates nearby will be able to surround him and kill him. Fred thought the plan in his heart was extremely perfect. He was very happy, even if you are a destruction-level powerhouse, by that time. You are just a fish on my chopping block. A little worse. I will definitely bring out the anger in your heart. Fred flashed a victorious smile. On the outside of his mouth he provoked Wild. Why don't you say anything anymore? Because I said it right where it hurts. You know, your disciple is more resilient than you right now. Much stronger. Even when his heart was about to explode, he did not ask me to forgive him. Fred's eyes widened as he looked at Wild. Regret? Still standing? Then come and kill the ringleader. Take revenge for your disciple with your own hands. Wild's feet lifted up and he did not hesitate to step into the formation. But that formation under Wild's feet was just like a trick. Wild just stomped on that formation and it broke like glass. Fred couldn't believe it. His eyes widened and he covered his mouth and shouted, what? How can you master the master-level destruction formation? But Fred still smiled. Success. He has entered the magic circle. Come on everyone. Countless shadows appeared from behind Fred. Animals speaking human language. They shouted, come on brothers. Today will be the day of Wild's death. Another one said, quick. Don't be afraid. Scared. They rushed towards Wild, attacking Wild from behind, shouting, Wild, aren't you really arrogant? Today I will let you go to heaven. Kill, kill, kill. Now the world, there's nothing that can stop me. At this moment, Fred realized something and shouted loudly. Wait, the situation has changed a bit. Don't get close to him. Everyone back away. At this time, Wild still showed no signs. Turned his head slightly, moved his lips and said the word, corpse. Wild's snake eyes flashed blue light. He said, are you talking about you? Those humanoid beasts couldn't attack Wild even with a fingernail. Right in the middle of their air was killed. Blood fell like rain. A few drops of blood even fell on Wild's mask. In the middle of the blood a giant snake appeared. It opened its mouth wide, waiting to look at the enemy. Wild stood in the middle of the snake, staring at Fred opposite. Fred couldn't believe it. His eyes widened, thinking, no, not good. I was fooled. When did that Wild guy become so powerful? The situation is not good. We have to hurry up. Suddenly, the white bandages on Fred's body broke off. Fred couldn't believe it, looking at his hands and wondering in his heart, what's going on? Could it be that my body is affected by the power of words? What he said and now turned into a corpse. It's impossible for even a destruction-level body like mine to be affected. Then his strength is just scared. Gradually cracked, black blood running. Wild stared at him. Fred was bewildered. Oh, once. Fred shouted loudly, you. Don't come closer here. Fred sat down on the ground. Tears flowing from the corner of his eyes. He stepped back and raised his hands to beg and told Wild, stop. Don't come close to me. I was wrong. That's what we have. Can it be resolved peacefully? You only need someone willing to spare my life. I will give you everything. Fred trembled and looked at Wild. He said, that's right. Look at this. What is this? If you spare my life, I will return your disciples' relics to you. From now on, I will never appear before you again. Fred trembled and took out the blue ring that Charles wore on his hand. If you don't agree, I will crush this ring. You probably don't want that to happen. Right, this is the only relic. Your most beloved disciple left behind in this world. At this moment, Wild spoke. I told Charles this before. A black aura tightly wrapped around Fred's arm holding the ring. Emotions and nostalgia do not need to linger on things dead. A black snake is sticking out its long tongue. With a big mouth, just having him exist in our memories is enough. The snake's mouth opened wide and bit into Fred's arm. Fred screamed loudly in pain. Ah. Wild spoke. Now. Wild's lips moved to say something. The snake's eyes Wild stared at Fred. The little snakes were sticking out their tongues and licking around Fred's face. Fred said, no. The snakes surrounded the place where Fred was sitting. The black air gradually receded. Wild pulled his hat down low and said, it's so hard to hear. If I knew that I would have covered his mouth first. Wild bounced his feet and jumped on the black snakes that were still circling around the city like smoke. High above, Wild looked up and whispered the name, Charles. Wild walked in the air. He looked down at the city below and whispered, we've lived in this city for 7 years. It's been 7 years. What a beautiful city. But now this city doesn't have you and me to say. Nothing but sadness. Wild held out his hands. In Wild's hands a stream of black and red light appeared. A giant formation appeared behind Wild's back. Wild's mouth moved and said, that's why I will bring it down to keep you company. Wild's snake eyes glanced at the city below. Hope you will like this fireworks display. That giant magic formation shone from the sky. Countless red and black lightning bolts appeared on the ground. Those red lightning bolts were like a fishing net preparing to encircle this city. A red-haired girl was sitting on the ground holding a little girl in her arms. Her eyes wide open when she saw the image in front of her. The black and red aura gradually covered the city and was about to hit the girl. A figure with a white cloak appeared in front of the red-haired girl and the little girl. Joseph's eyes flashed. Joseph brought his fist, punching hard with a blast of force very strongly towards Wild to block the other move. Joseph shouted loudly at the two people behind him to quickly lie down. A stream of white air and Wild's black and red air collided. The two streams, the air collided strongly. No airstream was inferior to the other airstream. The snakes that Wild created were under the influence of the white airstream and gradually disappeared. Two airstreams exploded in the air. The hat was on Wild's head fell under the impact. Wild looked bewildered and silent without speaking. Wild's figure stood in front of the moon. His hands still clenched. And Joseph raised his fist right in front of his face. His arm Joseph tightly grasped the tall and mighty man. Joseph's lips moved. Joseph stood up straight with his shirtless upper body revealing his muscular muscles. A sword was hanging on his leg. Joseph looked at Wilde and said, "Go somewhere else but fireworks, the black-scaled faceless man." Frank Wilde. Joseph's face was full of seriousness. His eyes flashed and glanced at Wilde. "Get out of this city for me." Wilde saw the bar. He moved his lips. "That sword. Is he one of the 10 great knights of the mysterious tower? The undefeated Saint Joseph?" Wilde covered his eyes. His hands trembled and smiled softly. "Why does it have to be now?" Blood flowed down Wilde's mask. "Is it even the last thing I did for my disciple? Do you also want to take it away?" Wilde's entire black mask was bleeding. Wilde shouted loudly, "Good job. I remember you well, Joseph. Then I will replace it with." Wilde's figure stood in front of the moon. Countless large and small purple balls gradually appeared. Wilde said, "Take your life to pay for my disciple." Joseph stood still and looked without saying anything, while the red-haired girl was holding the baby sitting on the ground. One crying, the other laughing because she had escaped. Joseph turned his head to look at the two of them, then also smiled. "Smile." Joseph pulled out his sword and jumped up. "Try it. If you can, you crazy old man." Wilde was also crazy, screaming loudly, carrying a black and red aura rushing towards Joseph. Joseph also carrying a white aura, holding a sword and stabbing towards Wilde. Joseph screamed loudly. This is a battle, the first fight between Wilde and Joseph. The two of them struggled in the air for a whole day. White light flashed, countless golden balls like the noon sun also flashed. From then on the two became enemies. Eternal enemies never die. Wilde held out his hands and stared nostalgically and said, 10 years have passed. This pain still hasn't subsided at all. Perhaps it will stick with me for the rest of my life. The rest of my life. Wilde clenched one hand, his eyes still staring at the hands in front of him. "As I wish it will forever be my sin. Because I made a mistake, I shouldn't have committed a crime. So I have to bear the consequences that I don't want to bear." Wilde's snake eyes glanced slightly. The scarlet cult and the white wolf. Wilde's hand holding the shirt trembled. The moment they dared to step into the forbidden area. In this place, their deaths were arranged. After transferring Nuogene's underground sewer map and the method of using life fuel for Helix. We witnessed them killing each other crazily. In the end leading to self-destruction without even knowing it. Behind Wilde's cloak is like a large lake engulfing everything. Moreover, it also provides us with many high-quality living materials for survival. Sacrifice. Wilde smiled. His snake eyes flashed. "Yes. This is probably what Boss Lin wanted me to do clearly. I did not disappoint his expectations." Wilde walked away. "Now is not the time. I still need more strength. One day I will calculate the debt of that year with Joseph." Wilde walked to a place with cool green grass. Bouquet of flowers was placed in front of the tombstone. Wilde said, "This time the teacher said it can be done." And at this time on the other side, smoke was rising. The fire was burning brightly. This was the Project Factory. Fetal Machine Reincarnation Project. Factory number 07 of the Truth Association. Fire spread everywhere. Countless test tubes containing humans as experimental subjects were broken. One animal, an object with a strange shape, lying on the ground. The door was opened. People wearing protective armor and guns rushed in. A gunman took the lead and ran in. A commander's voice shouted from behind. "Hurry up. Prioritize checking to see if there is still a rock. Any witches. Remove all traps, then check for injuries or deaths. Then proceed with a quick review and treatment as soon as possible. Lowell Fitch is taking a stand. Ordered. Check carefully. If there is any discovery, report it back to me. Do not ignore any trace." People wearing protective gear and holding guns rushed inside. And the back of Lowell Fitch stood silently, looking without speaking. Walter Leonard now patted Lowell Fitch's shoulder and sighed and said, "You can't even say a word of comfort. Just sit there and grit your teeth. Next time is the day you will be so miserable that you will want to die." Walter said, "This pathetic scene looks like someone broke into this place and destroyed all the artificial human models." At this time there was a scream. Report. Discovered 6 research staff, of which 5 have died and 1 person who is still breathing has been taken to the hospital for treatment. Countless words. Report rang in the ears. Report. Test samples numbered 1374, 1383, 567 and 277 are missing. Test data has been uploaded. Another person also said, report. 2. The man stood listening to the report and remained silent. Lowell Fitch stared at the virtual system board. He said, these 4 sets of experimental data are all excellent. They sample the remaining ether traces. And the Philosopher's Stone was created and exploded in the center of the laboratory. Lowell Fitch's hand clenched and said, with the laboratory's level of preparedness, there is absolutely no chance of a stranger breaking in. Break into the laboratory and perform this kind of operation. Walter said in surprise, you mean, the person who ransacked and destroyed the laboratory and is being hunted is probably not the intruder. 2 figures stood looking at each other. Walter speculated and said, but an internal member of the Truth Association. Another person touched the test tube and also said, report found traces of the remaining ether. Analyze the uploaded image. One person sighed and said regretfully, how pathetic. The man looked at the girl lying on the bed covered in blood and said, lucky instead. We are only in charge of medical treatment. Working in such a high-risk laboratory is really too terrible. Another person also pushing the medical bed said, that's right. Look at the wound, this child probably only has half of his life left. And the girl was lying on the bed with blood-white hair all over her body. A pair of eyes behind the glass looked at the person lying on the ambulance bed and said, have you ever met her? He pointed at the girl lying on the ambulance bed. I've never seen a woman like this before in the lab. When the blonde hair was about to touch the girl's body, the girl's eyes opened wide. Blood splattered. The blonde's eyes widened. Blood spurted from the corner of his mouth and he lost his life just like that. The white-haired girl sat up, and the black-haired man was leading in front of the couple. His pupils constricted. When he turned his head he only saw the blonde lying face down on the bed. And the white-haired girl from before was nowhere to be seen. Right now, where did that white-haired girl come from? The black-haired man had already taken advantage of the black-haired man's shadow, covering a staircase leading somewhere. The white-haired girl killed the others and then climbed the stairs herself. Opened the ventilator on the roof. Slowly crawled away, then opened the ventilation cover of another room and climbed down the stairs. Only to see in the room ruined test tubes and dead people lying there. Everywhere, someone's hand was placed on the red blood. The water left on the road surface after the rain. The girl's whole body was covered in blood walking barefoot on the main road. The girl let out a loud sigh. While the girl was walking on the street holding her hands when she saw a black cat staring at her. She stopped to glance at the black cat. When the black cat was about to walking towards the girl, he only saw a feather falling. A pair of wings flying in the sky. The girl landed on the roof of a building. The girl looked at this city from above. Then she raised her head and looked up at the sky, looking from behind the strangely lonely girl's back. The girl smiled. Her face was slightly red and said, so beautiful. The girl raised her hand to touch the moon above. It coincides with the image when she was in the test tube and also touched the glass surface. The blue water in the test tube was flowing, creating bubbles. This is the artificial fetus S227. The artificial fetus. This contains a girl with her eyes closed. Her entire body covered with wires. This is not the girl's name but her production number, used to distinguish her from the test samples. Another experiment. The meaning of this number is that test sample number 227 was born in the second batch of tests. The artificial fetus project had a mark on the girl's back. This number was printed on it, on the back of the neck, and has barcode data. Since its inception, the Truth Society's mechanical plan has had a total of 3 batches of experimental experiments, including 3,050 serial numbers. All of them are numbered. Failure. Countless machines are attached to giant test tubes. Number 227 is no exception. But compared to other test numbers, her level of etheric harmony is higher. The girl's eyes in the test tube opened. At that moment a researcher said that number 227 only had 1 year of life left. It turned out to be 2 employees in the lab. The girl touched the test tube through the glass window above the sky and looked at the rain. From that day on, number 227 began to wait every night. She noticed many details that she had never seen before. Seeing, many ideas also arise that have never existed before. Everything suddenly flashes and then disappears. The girl's hand touched the glass that was gradually cracking. The girl stared at. With super hearing and vision she could get the information she wanted in just a blink of an eye. She knew the rules of movement and the daily changes of the staff in this laboratory. In short, she knows everything that happens not only in this laboratory but also in the entire experimental plant. She even knows the structure map of the entire reincarnation machine. The girl's eyes flashed, also knowing that someone wanted to take action tonight. The girl closed her eyes like many other experimental animals sleeping soundly. The scientists' others are busy doing their own work. They don't pay attention to anything. But at this moment there is someone's face in darkness. His hands placed somewhere sharp. Blood flowing down and falling into the experimental water was blue. It was like a drop of water causing bubbles to appear on the surface of a quiet lake. The fire flared up, loudly exploding. Countless giant test tubes exploded. Inside the factory caught fire. Dead people lying all over. And the figure of the other person standing dimly in the fire. The fire flickered behind the man. The man reached out to catch something in the laboratory tube. Experience. After getting the item, the man walked through the firelight and turned to leave. When the man left, there was an arm pushing a large rock up. The girl appeared completely naked. Appeared right in the light of the big fire. The girl gasped for breath. The girl reached out to touch the number on her neck. Her trembling hand tightly grasped that piece of flesh. The girl gritted her teeth and grumbled. The piece of skin on the girl's neck was torn off her body by the girl's own hands. The girl's figure fell to the ground. Blood shot out like fireworks. The girl's white hair fluttered. She turned away. Go there and leave the number 227 with the QR code. The girl goes to a place and looks at a dead scientist lying on the ground. She reaches out to take the clothes of the person lying on the ground and puts them on her body. Then the girl grabbed the other person's leg and threw it into the fire, causing the fire to burn the other person's body. Then the girl lay down again where the other person had just been lying. The girl opened her eyes and counted. 1. Then close your eyes. 2. 3. Then the door is opened. The medical staff pushes the door in. Their steps are hurried. They say, "No fluctuations ether. That person has left." When they saw the girl they shouted, "This place. There are survivors here. Quickly grab the handle." At this time her hair was flying. Her shirt was flying, covered in blood and fluttering. The girl touched her hands. One hand was clenched and shaking. The other hand was covered in blood and said, "So hot." The girl looked at the moon hanging high above, illuminating the whole city. Whispering and wondering, "Finally, you successfully escaped. Where do you want to go next?" The girl jumped up and said, "Let's get out of here first." The girl jumped over buildings like a Superman. Can't be discovered by others. Can't be caught by them. Before dawn I have to find a place to hide. The girl jumped over the buildings. But suddenly at this moment she fell hard to the ground. The girl screamed, "Ah!" A sound. The girl's shadow was projected on the wall. Blood flowed out of the corner of the girl's mouth. The girl looked at her hand and thought, "Damn. This body needs to be injected with vital fluid to maintain stability." The girl thought, imagining herself sitting on the ground. In front of the girl was a sea of blood and countless dead bodies. The girl thought to herself, "Even though it is possible to adapt, this requires time. No, I still can't escape. In the end, can I still only die miserably like those colleagues?" Blood spilled out. A dark shadow covered. The girl with her eyes tightly closed was lying somewhere. There was the call, "Child. Dear child, open your eyes." The girl's eyes are still closed. Her lips are moving, asking, "Who's there? Who's calling out to me?" A vague figure calls out, "My cute child. You don't know where I come from or my name." The other figure was also naked. Blurry with long hair down to the feet, but the face was not clearly visible. The other person said, introducing, I'm the bringer of day and night. The bell ringer of dusk. The sun and the moon are my eldest son and daughter. The stars and the lakes sing for me. I bless all things under the heavens and I make a covenant with everyone who has magic power. Whoever calls to the sun is my beloved. And whoever swears to the moon is my favorite. All that I love won't be harmed by darkness and chaos. The girl lying on the ground opened her eyes to listen. So say, sounds very beneficial. Right, so why do you pay attention to me? The corner of the other person's lips moved. His feet lightly touched the ground as if touching his feet and the surface of a lake. Why? Maybe it's because I like children who long for freedom. The girl's figure seemed to sink deep into the sea and was caught by the other woman. The other woman looked at the tear on the back of the girl's neck. The woman touched her hand on the girl's shoulder. The girl suddenly opened her eyes in surprise. The girl's face turned red and she glanced at the person behind her. The girl was shy. She pursed her lips. The person behind her complimented her, cute, geez. Okay, I'm not kidding you anymore. The woman reached out to touch the girl's face. Because you've always been staring at the true moonlight. So you're being serious. I will pay attention to you. The other woman faced the girl. The girl's face was red in the girl's blurred eyes. The other woman said, without mixing any thoughts. What a simple look. The woman moved her lips and smiled, not polluted by worldly definitions, nor bewitched by the light of truth. Woman caressing the girl's hair and said, feeling that kind of gaze. Even if it's not the person I promised, I would still protect it. This pure, precious look, she said in confusion. I don't understand what you're saying. The blurry woman touched the girl's head. It's okay. My child. You have a soul as beautiful and pure as water. It will be like a mold that can be cast, take on many different shapes. The shadow of the woman stood in front of the girl. You might be my chance. The woman reached out to pat the girl's head. The girl blinked one eye, asked, opportunity? What do you mean? The woman's eyes narrowed. You will know soon. Now is not the right time. The girl's figure gradually became more blurred. This place is not my dream. So what I can do very limited. Being able to meet like that is because there is a bit of chaos between the boundary of dreams and reality. The other woman asked the girl, tell me my child. Do you want to live? Continue. The girl's hand placed on the mushroom thigh tightly replied, want. The other woman smiled, okay. Then before I disappear, the moonlight hung high in the sky, I will lead you to the place with the only light among the stars. Girl standing in the night sky, let's go. My child, accept your destiny. Girl holding up a pair of tables looked up with her hands. The woman said, one day we will meet again in the dream. The girl woke up and was standing up on the quiet ground looking at the moon above. The girl looking at the scene in front of her. She fell into a daze wondering, where is this? But the girl passed out right in front of a house. In another place, where machines can be seen. A cloaked figure is standing above and observing everything. There are also two people behind him. This is the center of the factory. Reincarnation machine number 1. At this time a large tree with flowers emitting light. Deep in the forest, this is the hermitage of the Iris family in the secret forest. Footsteps rang out in a hurry. Countless goblins gathered together and someone announced, everyone, please evacuate carefully. A baby hugged his mother's leg and cried, Mom, I'm afraid. The mother comforted, don't be afraid. The high priestess will protect all for us. On the tree, there were 2 goblin soldiers standing. Guarding, there was an announcement, all clan members have entered the refuge area. And the defense barrier has been activated. The elders are guarding the teleportation spell at the altar. They are ready to deal with any unexpected situations. All the warriors, mages, and archers in the clan are ready for combat. Consecutive announcements, all warriors are in position. A person with blonde hair praised, very good. This time the danger is caused by the prophecy is enough to threaten everyone in the Iris family. It is necessary to set up a battlefield ready to welcome the enemy. Doris held her staff and looked at the tree emitting light in front of her. Serious eyes said, first I will use my body as a bait to attract the dream beast's attention. Then lure it to the counterattack formation. At this time all members will gather to destroy it. The other goblins replied, we understand. We have to be careful. The high priestess of the Iris clan. Doris the prophet. Doris's eyes narrowed, staring ahead. Next we will quietly wait for the dream beast to appear in the cracks of the dreamscape. Doris's eyes flashed. She raised her staff high. Then she jumped up. In the blink of an eye Doris was standing in the center of the formation. The yellow formation was activated. It was immense. At this moment a huge yellow ball appeared in the forest, causing the forest to shake. Doris observed. Then Doris's eyes flashed when she saw the scene below. She stood high and saw deep in the darkness there was something she wondered, it's breaking out of the shell so soon. She pondered. The prophecy revealed its name and level of strength, along with a few other tidbits of information. With its destructive level strength plus the terrain, it is possible this danger is beyond what I can endure. And the crack in this dream is also a bit special. It opens deep underground, in a situation where it is impossible to close the gap tightly and deal with it. Dream beasts will harm everything around. The situation is very difficult to resolve. Doris looked at the crack deep underground and calculated in her heart, this battle will not only protect the clansmen in the tribe, clan but also have to protect the forest that we rely on to survive. This is a responsibility that I must assume as a high priestess with prophetic powers. Suddenly at this moment Doris's eyes became a little blurry. She saw something black with 2 flashes of red light. Doris was startled and opened her eyes wide. Her face was engulfed in darkness. Sweat appeared on Doris's face. She thought, a feeling of gratitude. Suddenly, in the darkness, it seemed like there was a pair of eyes staring at me from behind. Doris stood still, her whole body trembling as she thought. How is this possible? Within the kilometers covered range of the Great Earth Barrier, no such existence was detected. This is absolutely not an illusion. I am a prophet. My premonition has the same power. Mysterious energy is connected with my destructive power. Foreshadowing and sensing are unmistakable. Doris gritted her teeth. She imagined herself standing in the darkness, and behind her there was another darkness staring, so the truth is that there must have been an unknown existence that noticed me and stared at me. Doris placed her hand on her chest, the other hand holding tightly. Doris asked herself, why? Is there anything valuable on that person that makes that existence pay attention? At this moment, the ground far away from Doris suddenly shook violently. Doris looked serious. Here we are. Doris's hand tightly grasped the staff, waiting for deep underground to see something giant rushing up from the ground. Its claws gradually revealed a monster like a man-eating flower plant, but it was much bigger. Growling loudly, its head rushed towards Doris. Doris closed her eyes. She raised her fist and said, Miss Silver, please bring the light of victory to the Iris family. Doris's staff in Doris's hand turned into a bow and arrow. An arrow with an iris tip appeared in Doris's hand. She pulled the string of the arrow and shouted, take this arrow and inform me. Ready here to welcome the enemy. The man-eating flower-like monster opened its big mouth as if it wanted to eat Doris in the stomach. Doris released her hand. The arrow rushed towards the monster. The arrow hit the monster's head so hard that it exploded. Doris smiled softly and silently looked at the huge monster with its body lying next to it. Doris dipped her feet and jumped, looking up at its head. She once again pulled out her bow and arrow and shot hard at the monster's body. The monster's body also caught fire, but it seemed like the monster was shot. The monster was not hurt at all. Waiting for the smoke to rise, the monster's head grew again, and the places where the arrow hit the navel also gradually healed. Doris looked at it seriously and thought, good, it's totally pissed off. That monster was like a giant worm crawling towards Doris. The fire flashed continuously. Doris stopped in one place. She looked at the monster in front of her with clenched teeth. This is not good. Right in front of Doris something jumped up from the ground. The giant monster closed its mouth. Then it seemed to gather its breath into its stomach and then released a powerful stream of fire towards Doris. Fire flowed out like a mountain of lava and spread everywhere. Doris's staff was also damaged. The iris flower on the staff had its petals broken off. Doris was breathing heavily. Her face was injured. She stood in the middle of the fire. Her clothes were torn to shreds. She gritted her teeth. It suddenly contains lava in its body. At this time the screams of the other elves rang out, there's a forest fire. Save lives. Doris was startled in the fire. Her eyes glanced over the fire and said, not done. Clansman. But at this moment an echo of, appeared right behind Doris. Doris stunned. She looked over, only to see a deep hole right in front of Doris. She squinted her eyes and thought, bastard. It seems like he already knows the intentions of my plan. He has to change the plan. At this moment, Doris's eyes widened. The monster once again opened its mouth and blew out a stream full of burning lava. Doris stood in the middle of the fire but could do nothing. She thought a little depressed. What is the omen at this time? No way. Does this dream beast live in a herd? At this time, the goblins in a certain direction also shouted loudly, the dream beast is here. Run quickly. Doris' whole body stopped. Her face was in darkness. She gritted her teeth, I don't have time to think so much. Let's protect the family first. Doris raised her staff high. The staff bloomed a red flower. A magic array appeared at Doris's feet. She said, teleport. The magic array lit up. Doris was no longer standing in the fire fighting the monster, but she was gone. On this side, the goblins of the Iris tribe were trying to put out the fire. They stood in the fire and shouted, the fire is getting bigger and bigger. Does anyone know basic water magic? Method to extinguish the fire, no way. There is no way to stop a fire this big. Retreat quickly. The other clans retreated back protected by the guards and magic users. Some said, is there no other way? Who will come to save us? At this moment, teleporting Doris appeared right behind them. Her eyes narrowed and remained silent. The whole group of goblins saw Doris and shouted happily, the High Priestess. The High Priestess. You have come. The High Priestess. What should we do now? Now. They hurriedly said, no need. It's going this way. Doris's hand holding the scepter was firmly pinned to the ground. She shouted loudly, calm down. Don't panic. She raised her hand and told them, there is a formation here that monster will be temporarily stopped. You guys should quickly go to the altar where the elders will respond to you. At the altar there is a traditional formation there linked to Nuo Jin. You guys quickly go over there and seek help from the Truth Association. Doris raised her hand and said to all of them, the trap is now gone. What does it mean? Telling the clansmen who are preparing to ambush to return here and have a battle to the death with the dream beast. All the goblins replied, yes. The High Priestess, while Doris on this side leaned on her staff on the ground. She propped herself up and sat down under the tree, thinking, this is the last resort. I have no other choice but to give up this forest. Doris collapsed and sat on the ground. The problem is that the number of dream beasts does not stop at these two. But there may be even more. The difference between the invasion of dream beasts at the level of destruction and the disaster. How much worse is the level of destruction? If this continues, the situation will go from bad to worse. Doris was a little worried. Her face covered in sweat. Her hand holding the staff tightly. There is definitely something terrible going on. Unpredictable. At this time, a figure appeared calling, the High Priestess. Doris turned her head to look at a child with pink hair holding an iris flower in her hand and held it out to Doris, this is for you. Doris' face looked slightly turned red and looked at the baby. The pink-haired child looked at Doris with clear eyes and slightly red cheeks. The mother said, the iris is the totem of the iris family. With it you can definitely defeat any evil dream beast. Hearing that, Doris couldn't help but smile. She reached out and patted the pink-haired child's head and said, thank you kid. Don't worry, it's my responsibility to protect you well. She smiled and patted the baby's head, thinking, that's right, the clansmen were no longer the arrogant warriors of the Spirit Kingdom that year. That's also the reason why I came to the Silver Maiden in legend to protect the family. Suddenly Doris realized something, wait. Silver Lady. Doris' eyes flashed, she thought of something, that's right. I can ask for help from him. He is Lin Ji. Doris thought, in the bookstore I met someone I know of Silver Lady. That is a bookstore owner with extraordinary appearance. But very gentle. Doris seemed to understand the problem, when I asked for his help to restore the glory of Iris family. He not only responded but also sold me 30 books with titles of old seals. He once said that this was something he prepared in advance to facilitate future work. I hope the clans, let's look first. Doris remembered the book with the black cover and the image of a star with a burning flame on it. Thinking, this is a rune with powerful magical power and at the same time it is also a door to one step into the path of learning in the best way. I will first let some clans with ether energy read it first. But the number of people who can read it is probably less than 100 people. But for now it seems that maybe, I'm always going in the wrong direction. Doris speculated. Could it be that the rune doesn't need to wait for everyone to learn it to be effective? But is it the method used in this disaster? Doris remembered Lin Ji's smile and thought. In other words, at that time he had already predicted this. It must be so. It can't be wrong. This must be the answer now. After thinking about it, Doris sang loudly to the goblins. Wait, you clansmen, listen to me. The clansman who was about to run away turned around and asked, what's going on? The High Priestess, do you have any orders? Doris walked towards them and said, I've brought it. I'll give you a gift from Lady Silver's acquaintance. It's Lady Silver's will and also the key to facing this crisis. Those who have read the rune in the book called the Old Seal. Please draw it now. Doris quickly drew a star for one person. She also drew a star for herself. And on the other side, the elves were still using magic to fight with that dream beast. There were others who helped the injured with treatment. Those dream beasts are too strong. They attack loudly in front of the bewildered eyes of the goblins. That monster breaks the barrier. The goblins quickly run away. They screamed loudly, "It's not okay. The barrier has been broken. Run quickly. It's here." A woman was holding her child and couldn't run in time to see the figure of the monster falling. She held her child in her arms to protect her and said, "No." Tears flowed from the woman's eyes. Silently looked at the monster. But before the monster could attack the woman, it was burned by fire. The woman was extremely bewildered. The monster screamed. Its mouth blue liquid flowed out and fell to the ground. The elves who were fighting saw this and said, "Quickly look, that big monster isn't moving anymore." A person next to him reminded, "You idiot. Don't, I'm distracted right now." Something of the monster attacked towards them again. The orange-haired goblin shouted, "Damn it." At this moment, Doris raised her staff and hit it hard towards the monster. Doris shouted, "Don't be careless. Remember what I taught you, okay?" Doris floated in the sky. The other fighting elves also floated. She said, "No matter what creature, when under attack, it will feel pain and fear, or even reveal itself. Loophole. But for that kind of attractive berry there won't be this kind of feeling.